First tonight, new details in the case of a Maui doctor accused of trying to kill his wife reveal shocking claims on both sides.
And the judge decided new evidence should be unsealed. Our Mahealani Richardson has the latest developments.
In court today, the defendant, Maui anesthesiologist Gerhardt Konig, looked at the camera and made a shaka when he walked in. He's accused of attempted murder by allegedly trying to push his wife, Ariel, off an Oahu trail and injecting her with needles last year. It's a case that's gotten worldwide attention.
Just a simple Google search of Dr. Gerhardt Konig. Just pages and pages and pages of stories, CNN, Court TV.
The judge decided to unseal investigators' interview with Konig's previous ex-wife, except for certain sections. The state insisted the interview was relevant to the case, but Konig's attorney accused prosecutors of misconduct and said details could taint the jury pool 1 month before trial.
When I saw that, I became immediately concerned. And the reason why is there were, as I indicated, very highly inflammatory, salacious, unsubstantiated, unrelated, irrelevant claims made against Dr. Konig by his ex-wife.
Prominence of a case and publicity itself does not necessarily produce prejudice, and juror impartiality does not require ignorance.
In other court documents, Ariel Konig claims Gerhardt accused her of an inappropriate relationship with another man and then pressured her to have sex. She claims he also spied on her online and on her phone. Gerhardt says she falsely portrayed herself as a victim of sexual coercion and transferred more than $123,000 from their joint bank account 3 days after his arrest. Ariel filed for divorce last May. Gerhardt's attempted murder trial is tentatively set to begin in early March. Mahealani Richardson, Hawaii News Now.